Hello, I'm Erin. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing my December 2023 reading wrap-up and talking about all the books that I finished reading during the month of December. I still have a few books I'm working toward, and I'm filming this before the last day of December, so it's possible that I'll add in a couple of clips if I finish any more books by the end of the year. But for now, these are the ones that I've definitely finished this month. I do have a couple of books that I will probably be carrying over into the new year as well, and I might talk about that in a separate video. The first book I finished reading in the month of December was a Christmas read called Snowed In for Christmas by Jacqueline Snow. This is about two people who are basically neighbors who end up being snowed in at Christmas time, and there's a forced proximity element that comes into play. It was fun and lighthearted, a little bit silly at times. I wrote in my notes to myself that I liked that their second misunderstanding in the book was a little bit more realistic than I usually see in some novels. Sometimes the misunderstandings can actually be a little bit frustrating and unrealistic, in that if two grown adults would just have a normal, mature conversation, they could solve a lot of things. And so when authors kind of keep their characters from doing that for the sake of drama, it can be a little bit off-putting to me. But I felt like their second misunderstanding in this story revolved around some circumstances that were a little more believable. I did think that it had a couple of pacing issues, and it did have a lot of language in it, which isn't necessarily my favorite thing. So I think I ended up giving this one 2 stars. It's probably one that I wouldn't read again, but it was cute, and I think a lot of people would like it. Then I read a series of picture books, which is something that I've been slowly doing throughout the year, just to kind of get a feel for what is being published in picture books these days. I've been writing a couple, and I'm starting to illustrate them. So it's a genre that I have been exploring, but I read a couple that I liked a lot. I read 3 John Klassen picture books. They were my first John Klassen reads, and I loved them. They were The Rock from the Sky, I Want My Hat Back, and This Is Not My Hat. I think I gave all of them 5 stars. I may have given one 4 and the other 2 5, but I really loved them. I highly recommend them if you're into kids' books or you just want something really light and silly. All of them made me laugh, and I really liked them. And then I read another picture book called Kipunamuk, and I don't have the book with me anymore. It was a library book, so I don't have pronunciation guides with me, so I may have pronounced that wrong, but it's by Danielle Greendeer, and it's basically about the Thanksgiving story, but from an Indigenous perspective instead of a colonialist perspective, and I thought it was really good. I believe I also gave that one 5 stars. Yep, I did. So I read those. Then I read When Religion Hurts You by Dr. Laura Anderson. I talked about this book a little bit in the video I put up about books for people who are deconstructing or just re-examining their beliefs, if they were raised in a Christian tradition or have spent time in those kinds of environments. I spent about 10 years in a very high control religious environment and endured some spiritual abuse and religious trauma that I've been working through and healing from, and I found this book to be so good and so relevant. If you've experienced anything like that or are curious about people who have, I would recommend watching my video about deconstruction books, because I talk about this one a lot more in that video, so I'm not going to go into it too much here, but it's definitely one of my 5-star reads from this year. It might be my favorite nonfiction read of 2023. I thought it was really good. It really resonated with me, and it's one that I've already been recommending to other people I know. Then I read another Christmas book called Faking Christmas with Carrie Winfrey. This was a very sweet, closed-door, funny romance inspired by an old black and white Christmas movie called Christmas in Connecticut. And the movie is kind of based on this woman who writes for, I think it's a magazine in the movie, but she does so under false pretenses, kind of pretending that she owns a farm. And the author in this book also does the same thing, pretending that she owns a farm, but she doesn't actually own the farm. Her sister does, and her boss ends up coming out to the farm for Christmas, and so she has to pretend that she owns the farm and pretend that she's married to somebody. And I just thought this was so fun and so cute. I really liked it. I think I ended up giving it, how many stars? I ended up giving it 4 stars, and it's one that I might read again in the future. I definitely want to check out more of Carrie Winfrey's books because I thought this was just really cute. Then I read The Book of Common Courage by K.J. Ramsey, Prayers and Poems to Find Strength in Small Moments. This was another 5-star read for me. I have a lot of tabbed pages where there were poems or lines that just really resonated with me and I really liked them. I'm very selective with the kinds of books that I'm reading that fall into a Christian genre right now, just because I find a lot of things very off-putting or re-traumatizing. But this was one that I really liked the book, and it's got some really beautiful photography sprinkled throughout with her verses. So it was one that I really liked. Then I read Counting the Cost, a memoir by Jill Duggar with Derek Dillard and Craig Borlace. This I actually found in a little free library and traded a book for it, but I ended up listening to the audio version because I really like listening to memoirs when they're narrated by the author. This one was. I had zero exposure to the Duggars before picking up a couple of their memoirs. I started the other sister's memoir. I forget what it's called now, but I didn't finish reading it. I got a few minutes in to the audiobook and realized that it just wasn't going to be for me at the time I was reading it. But this one I thought was really interesting. I really liked how honest she was about a lot of the hard things she endured and about kind of like just the things that weren't right about what she went through and about her family. I thought it was a very interesting and well done memoir. I ended up giving this one 5 stars. If you're not familiar with the Duggars either, they were part of a TV show, I believe, called 19 Kids and Counting that aired on TLC. I don't know when because I never saw it, but she has grown and married and has been making a family of her own and is now telling her story. Then I read A Year of Biblical Womanhood by the late Rachel Held Evans. I've read another book by her called Searching for Sunday, and I really enjoyed it and ended up buying a few of her other books, and I've been slowly getting to them. This was one. I ended up listening to the audiobook of this one too. It's read by her sister, and it's available on Hoopla, which you can connect to with your library card if you have access to that. But it's basically her story of going through a year-long experiment of following rules that are laid out in biblical texts for women fairly literally, and just kind of talking about that experience and also highlighting where interpretations of those rules have really influenced or been used to oppress women throughout history. I don't know, I thought it was interesting. It was a good read. I ended up giving it 5 stars. Then I listened to an audiobook called She Builds, The Anti-Hustle Guide to Grow Your Business and Nourish Your Life by Jada, I think it's Jada Selner. And I gave this book 2 stars. It promises to be like an anti-hustle culture guide to business building, which is an idea that really resonates with me. I'm very much anti-hustle culture at the minute, very much like re-examining my relationship with capitalism and trying to find ways to exist in a world where capitalism is our economical structure and kind of do business in a way that doesn't perpetuate that as much. It's like a hard thing to navigate, and it's something I don't hear a lot of people talking about. So when I saw this title in Barnes & Noble when it first came out, it really appealed to me. Well, I found it on Hoopla recently, and so I listened to the audiobook on a day when I was like doing my plant chores and watering things and propagating a few things. And I don't know, I have such mixed feelings about it. I really wanted to love it because I wanted to hear what I needed to hear out of it. But what it ended up sounding like was just repackaged hustle culture that's been rebranded for moms and people who have a partner who is willing to be a 50-50 business partner with them. So I don't know. I felt like it claimed to be a lot of things that it wasn't. It was just hustle culture repackaged. And the author even quoted frequently a lot of the other authors who really promote hustle culture, and that was interesting to hear too. I have some thoughts about that because now a lot of the authors who were teaching people to build businesses within the realm of hustle culture are now selling products and courses about burnout to the same people who they taught to build businesses using hustle culture strategies. And those people are burnt out, and now they're capitalizing on their burnout because they actually did what the hustle culture teachers told them to do. So I feel like there are some ethical problems with that. And hearing her quote the hustle culture teachers in her book in ways that seemed to condone the way they teach you to do business just was a turnoff for me. I didn't really enjoy it. I didn't find much helpful out of it. There was one chapter in the book that I thought was actually relevant and helpful for someone who's trying to figure out how to do business in an anti-hustle culture way, and that was it. So it's not a book that I would actually recommend to someone who's trying to kind of navigate that. I didn't think it was very helpful. Then I read the first book in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. This one has, I think, all 5 books in it, but I just read the first one, which is called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, and this book falls within the genre of sci-fi. It's so wacky and so zany, and it jumps around a lot. So in the beginning, it's a little bit hard to get into because as soon as you start to kind of get invested in the storyline, it jumps to some other place in the galaxy with different characters, and it takes a little bit of time for everything to come together. But I did think that it was really silly and really fun. The writing style is hilarious, and what I wrote in my Goodreads review really sums up well how I felt about it, so I'm just going to read that. I wrote, "This book is like the screwiest of screwball comedies set in space and complete with a robot that has the personality of Eeyore. There really isn't much plot or character development, but the writing is so hilarious and full of little brain tickles that I didn't really mind." And that really perfectly sums up how I felt about this book. I don't think I'm going to jump right into book 2 because I just have other things I want to read, and I didn't love it enough to be just on the edge of my seat waiting to see what happens in the next book. But it was silly and it was fun, and I did enjoy it. Then I finished a book called Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools with Tyler Staton. I've been buddy reading this book with my gran. Every year we pick a couple of books to read together. Usually one of them is kind of like a 365-day meditation journal or devotional. And so we're doing one of those right now that has like recipes incorporated that we stop and make together when we reach them. And then we were also reading this book, which was also recommended to me by another person in my life. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. There were a few places where I just disagreed with the author on something or found something that he said a little bit off-putting, or I just don't hold to the conclusion that he presents anymore within my own belief system. But there was a lot that I did like about this book. I liked that there are places where he's really honest about some of the things that I've encountered in my own life surrounding the concept of prayer and the practice of prayer. And I did think that there were a lot of like really helpful exercises and thoughts that he shared. So it is one that I think is worth reading, and I will keep it in my library. The next book I finished reading was The Holiday Swap by Maggie Knox. I have since learned that Maggie Knox is a pseudonym for a writing duo, and I think I've left a note to myself about their real names. Their real names are Marissa and Karma. I ended up giving this 3 stars. It was lighthearted and fun. I did find it a little bit hard to get into at first because the storyline is split between 2 different sisters, and so we jump back and forth between their perspectives every other chapter. So as soon as you start to become invested in one, you're now learning about this other person who's living this other life in a different place, and it was a little bit jarring at first until I started to become invested in both characters. And I did find quite a few typos and editing errors and just a couple of inaccuracies with a couple of things throughout the book that kind of were distracting. So I ended up giving it 3 stars, but it was a really cute read. Then I finished a book called It's Okay That You're Not Okay, Meeting Grief and Loss in a Culture That Doesn't Understand by Megan Devine, who holds a master's in counseling psychology. This book is basically about grief and how our culture really, in the West at least, doesn't, we don't really know what to do with grief. We kind of avoid grief in even the ways we tell stories and in the ways that we expect people to always have a happy ending or redemption at the end of something that happens that is bad, or, you know, just kind of just all of the ways that our culture falls short for people who are grieving, which is everyone at some point. And I thought this book was really good. I initially picked it up after I lost my dad in 2020, and I picked it up at the same time as I picked up a stack of grief books. And at the time, I read the first few pages, first chapter of each book, chose a couple that I wanted to actually keep reading at the time that were really resonating in that moment with me. And this wasn't one of them. So I had set this one aside, and it's just been kind of on my bookshelf since. I've wanted to revisit it, but I hadn't. And a couple of months ago, my therapist said she read it and thought I would really like it. And so I said, oh, I have that book. I'll go ahead and read it before our next appointment. And I didn't finish it all before the next appointment, but I had read enough of it to see why she had told me she thought I would like it. The author kind of talks about grief and loss in ways that I have spoken about grief and loss with my therapist. And I just thought this was a really good book. I ended up giving it, I think, 4 stars. But since I finished it and rated it, I've been thinking about upping it to 5 stars. It's one that I would definitely recommend to other people who are grieving or dealing with loss, or anyone who just knows someone else who has lost someone, anyone who wants to be there for people or for somebody who has lost someone and is walking through grief. It's just such a good book, and really I think everyone should read it. Then the last book I finished, at least for now, was Peace is a Practice, An Invitation to Breathe Deep and Find a New Rhythm for Life by Morgan Harper Nichols. Morgan Harper Nichols is one of my favorite poets. She writes beautiful books about poetry that are illustrated with vibrantly colored artwork. In fact, give me a second and I'll show you some of her books. So she's written these 3 poetry books as well. They're some of my favorite books of poetry. They're so beautiful. And I actually love giving people these. Every single page is just so lovely and so vibrant. And let me just find one page to show you. So she'll have like a poem or a verse here and some writing, handwriting, and just like really vibrant, colorful pages. And whenever I read her books, I just think that I want to get extra copies and like deconstruct them and frame all of the pages and put them all over my office because they're so beautiful. But anyway, yeah, if you haven't read those, you might like them. I really enjoyed them. And because I really enjoyed them, I picked up her book, Peace is a Practice, which is more of just a chapter book that has a bunch of different chapters about building a practice of peace into your life through different means. I thought this was a really good read. I ended up giving it 5 stars, and it is one that I would recommend. So unless I finish any more books before the end of December and add a clip in here about those are all the books that I read in the month of December. If you've read any of them, I'd love to hear about what you thought about them, or if you thought any of these sounded appealing and maybe you're going to pick up a copy too. I'd love to hear about that as well. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.